From an intelligence perspective, how did that October 7th thing not get detected? I mean, doesn't the IDF, don't they have agents embedded in Hamas? Don't they have like the most intense security system ever and surveillance system ever?
They do, yeah. And it was a massive intelligence failure. And in part, it was a very, I don't want to say sophisticated, is the wrong word, but in terms of the planning of this, if you're conducting an operation or you're conducting any intelligence really concern, then the first thing you need to worry about is need to know, right? So how do you limit information? How do you limit the dissemination of information about what you're doing? And that's just good OPSEC. That's good operational security. Now, that's what they did. They displayed extremely sophisticated, I suppose, operational security over this. Because you're right, there's human sources that the IDF and Shin Bet and others in Israel have within Gaza. There's the communications intercepts, signals intelligence. There's just general surveillance that they're doing of the region in terms of movement of goods. But most of that movement of goods happens underground. Right? 300 miles of tunnels in Gaza that they've built, using money, by the way, using money that was probably meant for clean water works and other infrastructure and improving schools and hospitals. That's a whole different angle to talk about. But
yeah,
I think the security side of things, by doing that, by limiting who knows about the operation, and because again, you could legitimately argue the political leadership of Hamas, they had a sense, I'm sure at some point they approved a large-scale operation, but the people who really knew about this were the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, which is an organization with the Iranian regime, and they're kind of the liaison partners for Hamas and Hezbollah. They manage a lot of the training issues. They funnel a lot of the money that goes to these organizations that are Iranian proxies. And so you can count on the fact that a limited number within the IRGC were aware of the planning and the training, because they did train Hamas operatives in Iran prior to 7 October. So I think, yeah, it was simply a matter of them saying, all right, this element, this cell will have knowledge of this during the course of training. These guys over here will know this. These people will know this. And maybe a handful of people will understand the full picture and will understand when we're going to do this. And it's all designed to keep it away from Israeli intelligence. And it was ridiculously successful in that regard. So, and also you could argue intelligence is a human operation, or an endeavor. So you're going to have failures on occasion. You just don't want them to be this massive. There were occasional comments about the inclination of Hamas to do something bigger. No specific details. And Hamas also spent a great deal of time leading up to this, years, convincing the Israeli government through their words, through their actions or lack of actions, that it was a new day and that what they're looking to do is create a different dynamic or relationship with the Israeli government. And so the Israeli government became complacent. And when they became complacent to some degree over Hamas and the fact that there hadn't been any strikes or hadn't been any terrorist actions for a period of time, then what you saw was then they kind of turned inward. And people talk about the political divisions within Israel and the fact that the government was in a bit of disarray and it was a little dysfunctional, a lot of arguments going on. That in part was because, they had the not luxury, but the ability to kind of turn in on themselves because they didn't feel necessarily that threat outside was as bad as it had been, right? And that they thought perhaps it's diminishing, perhaps Hamas is changing its tune. And that was a deliberate attempt by Hamas to lull them into that state, right? And so there were a lot of things going on at the same time, but yeah, there's no way around it. It's a massive intelligence failure.
The most cynical and conspiratorial take on it is that they let it happen because this is the best way to destroy Hamas. That they knew it was going to happen, so they allowed it to take place. Yeah,
that's pretty cynical. Yeah, if you can get your head around that idea that they said, yeah, we're going to let Hamas or somehow encourage Hamas to come in and slaughter all these women, babies, children, men. I suppose that's, if someone can get there, then God bless them, that's their right. But I'm not buying it. I've seen intelligence failures before. I know it can happen. No matter how many cameras you've got up, no matter how good your signals intelligence intercepts are, they dumb that down, right? I'm not calling anybody on the phone because I know you're going to pick that up, right? I'm not going to talk about this anywhere.
Right.
I'm going to hand a note to my cousin, who runs a a part of a battalion in Hamas. They got whatever 24 battalions. So I'm going to keep that communication as stupid as I can. That's what Al-Qaeda did, right? And they dumbed it down, and it becomes much more difficult. They limit the number of sources who know about it. That limits your target pool of assets who can tell you something from the human perspective. And, but again, people are going to – I've seen some pretty wacky conspiracy theories come out of this since 7 October. And, I'm not buying that one.
Yeah, the most conspiratorial was that Netanyahu was kind of on the way out with the people, and that this is the way for him to sort of galvanize everybody and get support and maintain power and then do what he actually wanted to do, go in there and attack Hamas.
Yeah. Well, it's one theory.
Yeah.
But
whenever you have something this chaotic, you're always going to have a bunch of wacky theories.
Yeah, yeah. And I get that. Because you have a lot of people who, still refuse to believe that, Hamas doesn't give a shit about Palestinians. And again, I keep going back to the same thing, which is, well, take a look at Gaza, and tell me what Hamas has done for the people of Gaza. Because again, Palestinian people aren't lined up 100% behind them. In fact, there's been reports of looting of Hamas facilities since they've been losing their grip on Hamas leadership structure. Is enormously wealthy. Right? They've stolen billions of dollars that was theoretically intended for Palestinian improvements.
Can you explain that? Like, how did they get a hold of the money, and how is the money allocated? Like, say, where is the money coming from when they get money for the improvements of sanitation and education and schools and all that?
It comes from a variety of sources. Look, I think the EU, the European Union, is I think the largest donor still to the Palestinian people, and it comes through various organizations. So the United Nations, the Refugee Office, UNRW, the USAID, and some NGOs, and quite a few NGOs. So money is donated or allocated by governments, and the U.S. has given billions of dollars through these organizations for the improvement of Palestinian lives. Right. For part of that came out of the Oslo Accords, the idea being, band together, improve the infrastructure for the Palestinians, create this, because that will march towards more stability, and eventually maybe that allows for a solution, that will eventually come about, and whether it's a two-state solution or however it's worked out. So that money flows in, but since 2007, Hamas controls what goes. It's like when we give money to the Taliban now, giving money to the Taliban in Afghanistan. And we like to pretend like they're going to use it for good causes. We like to pretend we know where it's going or how it's being handled. But this money flows into these various organizations, and Hamas controls what happens, right? So one way or another, they get their hands on that money, and they decide what they want to do with it. And for the most part, it has been for the betterment of Hamas as an organization, in part because that's what Iran expects them to do. And Iran also provides them with funds. Not the Palestinian people. Iran directly funds Hamas. So over the years, they have the leadership, and particularly the political leadership, who all basically live outside the Gaza, in Doha. And, some reports, and they're confirmed by the U.S. Treasury. It's not just the Israelis saying this. They're billionaires at this stage of life. And, one of them's got a couple of kids who are on Instagram, right? And they're flying on private jets, and they probably went to the World Cup when it was in Doha. And it's ludicrous, because billions of dollars that literally were meant to provide clean water or better schools or whatever. And people just, continue to shake their fists and say it's all Israel's fault.
How is the money allocated, and where does it go? And how does Hamas get their hands on the money? Like, what's the expectations when they're giving this money? And how, I don't understand. If they know that it's going to Hamas, why are they still sending money?
Well, in part because that's purpose. So the U.S. funds, say the U.S. says, okay, this year we're giving, $400 million through these various aid organizations. Now, the aid organizations at some point on the ground, right, have to make a difference, right? They have to, so it has to go somewhere. It has to go to middlemen. It has to go to somebody running a business who's then going to provide resources, whatever that is, grain, something, whatever, transportation, trucking to move things around Gaza, whatever it is. And Hamas, it's like a criminal gang, right? It's like an extortion racket almost. They're cut. They tax the resources that are brought in, right? Most of those things have to move. The most efficient way to move goods and services through Gaza at this point, because of all the work they've done in the tunnels, is the tunnels. So they tax goods moving through the tunnels. They make their money, right? And I don't want to. I'm not equating Hamas necessarily to a mob, but it's kind of what they've been doing. And so the money that comes from Iran, that's a different. That's Hamas. Again, they take their cut, right? I have it off, but then they spend it because they're beholden to Iran. They spend it on what they're supposed to, which is, more weapons, more gear, paying their. And so, yeah, coming back around to the notion that, the Palestinian people have been getting screwed, left and right. There's no doubt about it, right? And civilian casualties are sad. But we live in a very pragmatic world, hopefully. We're not, you can't rule this thing by feelings and hope and, positivity. Hamas chose a certain path, and they have to be dealt with, right? Because if you stop and allow them to say, okay, well, Hamas is still there, they're still running things, nothing changes. Doesn't improve the lives of the Palestinians, right? Continues to fuel and fund terror. So, okay, fine. If you feel better about a ceasefire and kicking the can down the road, but you're not, don't like you're solving something, So
when money gets allocated, it's like, say if there's money that's being sent to Palestine for clean water and all, who's receiving that money?
Well, it goes through the organization. So like that money is like a bank account. It's deposited with the UN Refugee Office. They decide, they allocate, because they have essentially vendors, right, who are saying, okay, we're going to provide whatever, penicillin, or we're going to provide hospital beds. Or whatever. So they're this out to a variety of vendors, both there's to try to ensure that it's Palestinian businesses. And Hamas also runs enterprises overseas, right? So, outside of Gaza. So they run, businesses in Turkey and a variety of other countries, right? So sometimes that money is going to a Hamas-controlled business, right, to then theoretically purchase whatever is necessary. We shouldn't imagine that Hamas they're not like Al-Qaeda. They're not sitting in a cave somewhere, right? They've been doing this for a while. And, it's a bit like the IRA. The IRA started out with a very clear mandate, right? Eventually, an element of it was just about drugs and money. So, keep coming back around to Hamas. They realize they got a good thing going, right? Stability is not going to keep that gravy train running. So,
like, share, and subscribe.